Good Monday morning. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, making their case. Lawmakers on the January 6th committee prepare for another round of hearings this week. We'll take a look at the key witnesses who will appear before the committee as members prepare more evidence in their attempt to prove former President Trump incited the riot at the Capitol. Plus, after last week's explosive hearing, what is the likelihood former VP Mike Pence could be subpoenaed to testify? Travel trouble. The summer season getting off to a rocky start with thousands of flights canceled or delayed over the weekend. And it wasn't just the weather that was to blame. The other issues that caused big problems. And we'll tell you what you can do to avoid being stranded at the airport. Long-awaited news for millions of parents. Kids younger than 5 now approved to get the COVID-19 vaccine. What every parent of young kids needs to know this morning. And celebrating Juneteenth. This year is the first time Juneteenth is a federal holiday, marking the end of slavery in the United States. Celebrations happening across the country this weekend and throughout the day today. And this year, it also fell on another big holiday, Father's Day. We'll take you behind the scenes of the new museum exhibit exploring and celebrating Black fatherhood. That is a great story. We'll bring you later this hour. And throughout the hour, we'll be talking about Juneteenth.
Yes, looking forward to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Good to have you with us on this holiday. We begin this morning with the January 6th hearing set to resume this week.
The House Select Committee investigating the Capitol attack has held 3 public hearings so far, trying to make the case that former President Trump promoted election fraud conspiracies he knew were false in an effort to stay in power. 3 more hearings are planned for the coming days. The next one is set for tomorrow afternoon. NBC News reporter Julie Sirkin joins us now with the latest on that and a preview of what's ahead. Julie, good to see you. So each of these hearings has had a theme so far. We're expecting this Tuesday hearing to focus on the effort to overturn the 2020 election results at the state level. So what should we expect specifically from that?
Yeah, exactly, Joe. Good morning. Tomorrow's hearing, the 4th hearing so far in the January 6th committee's investigation and the public side of these things, it will focus on the Trump White House's efforts to pressure state and local officials to overturn election results. We know we've confirmed earlier this month that Brad Raffensperger, the Georgia Secretary of State, and his deputy, Gabe Sterling, are expected to testify at a hearing this month. It would make sense, although the committee hasn't confirmed their witness list publicly, that they do so tomorrow to discuss their personal efforts. You'll remember that big phone call that was reported between former President Trump and Raffensperger, in which Trump told him to find the votes in order to overturn Joe Biden's election victory in that state.
So these hearings we know are designed to present what the committee has uncovered so far, but we should note their investigation is not done. It's still ongoing. And committee member Adam Schiff says they are looking to hear from Ginny Thomas. That's the wife of Supreme Justice Clarence Thomas, whose name we've heard a lot in recent weeks. They could also subpoena the former Vice President Mike Pence. So what can you tell us about the work that is still going on behind the scenes as they continue their investigation?
Yeah, look, we thought the committee would put down their pens by now, but that is not the case. Toward the end of last week, we learned the committee sent a letter to Ginny Thomas asking that she appear and that she talk with the committee about what she knows. You'll remember in the last couple of months, it's been uncovered that Ginny Thomas, the wife of Clarence Thomas, she, in fact, wrote to John Eastman, who was central in this Trump orbit of trying to overturn the election results. He was, of course, an attorney from former President Trump. She pressured state officials in Arizona, asking them to choose an alternate slate of electors that would ensure President Trump's victory and not Joe Biden's victory. And so the committee is still working to see what they can uncover here and the possibility that Ginny Thomas could change the course of their investigation. I want you to take a listen to what Adam Schiff, a member of the panel, said on CNN yesterday.
We want to know what she knows, what her involvement was in this plot to overturn the election. She has said that she is willing to come in and testify voluntarily. We're glad to hear that. Really, anyone with pertinent information we want to hear from. And so we have a range of questions to ask her. Obviously, I think the committee will be interested, among other things, whether this was discussed with Justice Thomas, given that he was ruling on cases impacting whether we would get some of this information.
Now, this obviously has to do with the theme of their hearing tomorrow, but we don't know what to expect yet from Ginny Thomas or how much she will come up at all in tomorrow's hearing. And separately, you mentioned Mike Pence. Adam Schiff also said the committee isn't taking anything off the table. They're still considering there's a possibility of subpoenaing the former vice president, who was, of course, a major theme of last week's hearing.
A lot of people will be waiting to see what happens there. Julie Sirkin, thank you so much.
Now, as the January 6th committee makes its case to the public, the Justice Department has made it clear they're listening. NBC News legal analyst Danny Ceballos joins us now. Danny, as always, good morning. Thanks for being with us. So one big question out of all of this is whether the Department of Justice will file any criminal charges against anyone involved here with any of this evidence that we're seeing. Now, committee member Representative Jamie Raskin was asked by Meet the Press moderator Chuck Todd what Attorney General Merrick Garland should do with all this information. First, let's take a listen and we'll talk on the other side.
You got to look at the culpability of the defendant, to what extent they acted willfully to do a criminal act. You've got to look at the gravity and nature of the offense. Of course, this offense has massive implications for the rule of law in America. And you've got to look at deterrence. That is, do we want to move into a system of government where losers in presidential elections can try to overturn the election by nonviolent or violent means?
Danny, based on what you've heard so far on these hearings, the evidence presented, I mean, what does come into play here? What laws are at play? What laws were potentially broken? And do you think the former president could be charged with something? And if so, what?
First, when you see Jamie Raskin in that interview, notice that he just talks about the elements. He stops short of looking at the camera and saying, Merrick Garland, prosecute former President Trump. And there's a reason for that, because the committee needs to be very careful politically. They don't necessarily want to recommend charges overtly and push for them, because if Merrick Garland is considering charging anyone anyway, they don't want this to look like a political prosecution. Now, as to your question, it is very easy for someone like me to stand up here and go through all the elements of crimes like conspiracy to defraud the United States or conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. And you could argue that in many ways, the elements may have already been met here. Certainly as to people like John Eastman, who you could say the committee has proven that even though he's an attorney and he may have said he had a good faith belief that he could challenge this election, that he went forward being willfully blind to the fact that the election was lost, and he continued to pursue these theories. So even though someone like me could tell you, I think all the elements have been met, there is so much more involved in Merrick Garland making a decision to prosecute, because we're not really hearing, because this is a one-sided affair, the potential defenses, one of which would be the genuine belief that the election was not lost. And you even saw Trump in the last day post on Truth Social that I genuinely believe the entire time that the election was stolen. I still believe it today. That is a very strategic thing to do, because as long as he believes, and it's in good faith, and that's the real tricky issue, but if he believed that he had lost, or excuse me, that he won and it was stolen from him, then arguably he's allowed to pursue these avenues. But, you know, more and more, those avenues are being cut off because of all the testimony that he pressured Mike Pence. He went about this in a way that wasn't apparently legal.
Let's talk about what tomorrow's hearing is supposed to focus on, which was the pressure that was apparently put on states. And we know there's already a criminal investigation in Georgia alleging election interference by the former president. Could these hearings have any influence at all on that investigation in Georgia?
Yes and no, but this is a very unique situation, because there is already, as we know, a pending investigation in Georgia. And although the states and the federal government have overlapping jurisdiction, there is a federal policy that if the state investigation and prosecution will adequately represent state interest and there isn't any additional need to bring federal charges, sometimes the federal government will say, hey, state, go ahead, charge it. We think you've got this covered. But if the federal government believes that they need to charge something that is unique to the limited government, limited jurisdiction model of federal prosecution, then they may step in. And because they're considered separate sovereigns, separate kingdoms, there is no double jeopardy applicable, and they can proceed forward.
Danny Ceballos, as always, we so appreciate, you walking us through this. Thanks for being with us.
Good to have you with us, Danny. Now, staying in Washington, the White House is gearing up for yet another crucial week as the president looks to not only get a handle on inflation, but also ease fears of a looming recession for an anxious nation. NBC News Now correspondent Maura Barrett joins us now from Rehoboth Beach in Delaware. Maura, good morning to you. So first things first, how is the president planning to address the high prices so many Americans are dealing with and have been dealing with for so long now? We heard Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen mention a federal gas tax holiday over the weekend. So is this something the president is actually considering?
It is something the White House is looking at. They're also considering a gas rebate card for Americans. But the president and the White House have been messaging over the weekend that tackling inflation is their top priority, especially after that rocky week we saw with the economy last week. But it's important to note that there is that separation between the Federal Reserve raising those interest rates and what the White House can do. We saw several cabinet members on the Sunday political shows yesterday talking about how a recession is not inevitable. Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, predicting that while inflation will remain high this year, she does expect to see it come down in coming months. But I want to note, Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm noted about the gas tax, potentially the holiday, that would reduce prices about 18 cents just in the federal gas tax itself. But she did note that that money goes to funding roads and infrastructure, which is something this administration has worked very hard on. And so that's why we haven't seen that immediately take effect right now, because they're trying to see, the White House trying to see how else they can bring down prices elsewhere before having to take that step, Joe.
Switching gears, Maura, we know that there are stalled talks in the Senate over gun reform right now. Could we see the president perhaps consider stepping in at some point to try and get this deal across the finish line, especially with Congress getting ready to go on recess soon?
Well, President Biden says that he supports the framework, but there are some key elements missing in what Congress has presented. He addressed some of this with reporters here in Rehoboth over the weekend. I want you to hear some of what he said about what he wishes was included in it.
Satisfied with the progress on gun legislation?
Pardon me?
Are you satisfied with the progress on gun legislation?
In Delaware, I am. See what they did in Delaware?
No, it's not.
Passed the assault weapons ban, limited the number of... They did what I did years ago. That's what we have to do. But I am happy with progress. I'm prepared to sign it, and I'm ready to go.
So he would have preferred to see an assault weapons ban and an expansion of background checks. So now the president has kept a healthy distance from these conversations because we saw what happened and how things got delayed when he got involved with the Build Back Better plan, for example. And so right now he is in conversations. We know he's been having conversations with senators throughout this process. And like you heard, he said he's ready to sign it when he comes to his desk. But that might be why we're not seeing him get directly involved right now, Joe.
And Maura, we saw the president on his bike there, which reminds us that he fell off his bike over the weekend, got a lot of attention. Real quickly, how's the president doing?
Well, you saw him, that exchange with the reporters came after the fall. He had gotten caught, his toe caught in the toe cage there, which you can see on your screen. The president quickly popped back up, said he was okay, and then the White House telling us shortly after that no medical attention was needed. So clearly he was in good spirits after the fact. We were told that he was looking forward to spending the rest of the holiday weekend here with his family, Joe.
All right. We'll stop showing that video now. Maura Barrett, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Now to the big news over the weekend involving COVID-19 vaccines. The wait is over for parents wanting to get their youngest children vaccinated. On Saturday, the CDC gave the green light for Pfizer and Moderna vaccines to be administered to children as young as 6 months. Dr. Bob Lahita, director of the Institute for Autoimmune and Rheumatic Diseases at St. Joseph Health, joins us now. Hi, Dr. Lahita. So when can we expect to actually start seeing these shots available to kids that age? Where can parents go to get their children vaccinated?
Okay, Savannah, we're going to see the shots as early as tomorrow, and parents can go to their pediatricians. There will be vaccination clinics popping up in different healthcare centers and hospitals. CVS is able to give the shots to children 18 months and older. And I think the best thing to do is to call your pediatrician if you have any questions to find out where the shots are being offered.
All right, a couple more questions for you also. So as we said, the CDC gave the green light to both Moderna and Pfizer vaccines. So if parents are able to choose, what should they know about each vaccine? Are there any differences between the two or potential side effects?
Yes. Okay. Let's start with the two different vaccines. Both Pfizer and Moderna have the vaccines for children. They've been working on them for about a year or more. Pfizer, 6 months to 4 years of age. Moderna, 6 months to 5 years of age. Now, the Pfizer series is a 3-dose injection, 3 weeks apart for the first 2 shots and then 8 weeks for the third shot. That's about 80% effective, according to Pfizer. Moderna is 2 shots, 4 weeks apart. According to Moderna, that's about 51% effective. Now, if your little one gets the injection, you can expect increased fussiness, maybe a little bit of sleepiness, and maybe pain at the injection site. And some of the children rarely have a low-grade fever. So that's what parents can expect.
A little bit of fussiness. I get it. No one likes a needle. All right, doctor, there are, though, a lot of parents who are hesitant still to get their kids vaccinated. In fact, according to a recent study, just 18% of parents of children under 5 said that they would vaccinate their child against COVID-19 right when this vaccine becomes available. Nearly 40% of those surveyed said they would wait and see. What advice would you give to the parents who want to wait and see? What do you think about this?
Well, you've got to understand, Savannah, that this pandemic is not over by any stretch of the imagination. People think it's all over and we can just go on and do our thing the way we did back 3 years ago. But, 440 children have died from COVID since January of 2020. And kids that are below the age of 4 tend to be hospitalized more often than children above the age of 5. And this also includes the ICU. So it's not a worry-free time, and parents should not take this lightly. If your child has any susceptibility, certainly you should get the vaccine, but even a child who is normal and very, very healthy, and I've said this over and over with regard to adults, we just don't know who is going to adversely react to the full infection. So I advise you to get vaccinated.
Dr. Lahita, as always, we appreciate you, and we know the parents do this morning, too. Thank you.
Thank you.
New this morning, we are following 2 deadly shootings in 2 major cities. In New York, the NYPD is investigating an overnight shooting in Harlem. 1 person was killed and 8 others were injured just after midnight. Police say the shooting happened at a barbecue or some sort of neighborhood gathering. No word yet on a suspect or what led up to the shooting. And in Washington, D.C. yesterday, a 15-year-old boy was killed and 3 others were injured when someone opened fire at a crowded music event. It happened in the popular U Street district of the city. This video shows the scene moments after the shooting happened as people ran away. Police say 1 person was behind the attack. They are still looking for the suspect at this time. A D.C. police officer was among those injured in the shooting.
Now to summer travel chaos. We were warned it was going to be a difficult summer in terms of travel, and sure enough, it was another chaotic weekend as airline passengers tried to get home from the long holiday weekend. So far, this morning, there are already several hundred flights just this morning nationwide that have either been canceled or delayed, and that number is expected to rise throughout the day. NBC News correspondent Emily Aketa joins us now from Newark Liberty Airport, one of the busiest airports in the country, with the latest. Hey, Emily, good morning. So I was one of the victims of this great travel chaos on Friday. Tell us, how's it looking right now? How bad is it there, and how's it been around the country this weekend?
Good morning to you, Savannah. Yeah, this has impacted so many people. You can see some of the travel boom playing out right behind me here at Newark Liberty. And I think for a lot of people who traveled just a few weeks ago over the Memorial Day weekend, this feels like a bit of deja vu between the flight cancellations and delays, the long lines, and the limited rebooking options. Even as I was driving to Newark Liberty International Airport this morning, I could see the cars really inching along, trying to drop off passengers. Here at Newark, already dozens of flights canceled just this morning. More than 3,000 flights were nixed since Friday across the U.S. We spoke with an airline analyst about what kind of factors the airlines are up against this summer. Take a listen.
We just don't have enough people. And it's not only the airlines that don't have enough people. It's the airports, it's the catering costs, it's everything that has to do with traveling. The 2 biggest costs that the industry has are labor cost and fuel cost. And right now, jet fuel is over $4 a gallon. I've never in my career, and I've done this for more than 30 years that I admit to, I've never seen fuel costs this high, this sustainably long.
And those exorbitant jet fuel prices are one of the factors pushing up the average cost of a ticket, which stands at nearly $400 for a round-trip ticket this month. Still, it's not slowing demand. We saw 2.4 million passengers pass through U.S. airports on Friday alone. That is a record for so far this year and just shy of a pandemic high, Savannah.
Now, we know that Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg met last week with airline CEOs to discuss how carriers can handle this summer travel season boom, try to deal with some of these major issues we've seen. But is there anything that they or the federal government can do to avoid more problems, especially as, I mean, we're just getting started here. We've still got the 4th of July. We've got Labor Day. What can be done throughout the summer?
Yeah, many people haven't even begun their summer vacations yet. The Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg, really pushed for increasing the number of customer service representatives within airline companies. And that is something that we're seeing a lot of long lines around, whether it be at the customer service desk or at baggage claim. We've heard about those hour-long wait times on phones. So we'll see if an increase in employees helps relieve or alleviate any of the tensions and long wait times. The other thing that he floated was this idea that the federal government could potentially take action against airlines that are not meeting a certain consumer protection standard, though he says he wants to see how travel plays out over the July 4th weekend and the rest of the summer before kind of issuing any kind of enforcement action. Savannah.
Yeah, Emily, I saw one of those long lines on Friday with only 2 representatives working and figured that's got to be tens of hours if you're at the back of that line. Quickly, what about gas prices? Any relief there?
So I think that we're going to see gas prices remain pretty high for as long as volatile crude oil prices remain so volatile. That's hovering right now around $5 a gallon. That's up more than 60% compared to this time last year. One other thing I will add is we saw a 10-cent increase within just a week span in 10 states, Savannah. So still pretty costly to hit the road.
Emily Aketa, thank you so much.
Now to the observation of the newest federal holiday, Juneteenth.
That's right. It's been 1 year since President Biden signed the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act, making it a national holiday. It commemorates June 19th, 1865, when the last enslaved African Americans in Galveston, Texas, were finally told they were free, more than 2 years after President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. And celebrations are being held all across the country to mark the day.
NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster joins us now from Chicago. So, Shaq, tell us more. How are they celebrating where you are in Chicago and across the country?
Good morning. Well, across the country throughout the weekend, you saw celebrations big and small. Here in Chicago, that included bike rides that combined the holiday Juneteenth with Father's Day. You saw block parties and also official events where you had politicians show up and give speeches and also talk about the history of the holiday. And then across the country, you saw that similar theme where folks were trying to blend the idea of community with the idea of educating folks on the history behind the day. That was included in Buffalo, New York, where they have one of the country's largest Juneteenth celebrations. Of course, that was the site of the shooting just 3 weeks ago that targeted black shoppers. That was a march that you saw hundreds of people. And then you also saw events in Galveston, Texas. That, of course, is where this holiday started about more than a century ago.
As we mentioned, Juneteenth officially became a federal holiday just last year, and now awareness and appreciation of the holiday continues to grow. A Gallup poll, here it is on your screen, shows a significant jump in the numbers of Americans who say they have a lot or some familiarity with the holiday. What have you heard from people that you're talking to there?
Yeah, yesterday I attended a barbecue that was somewhat of a music festival. It was hosted by Chance the Rapper, and I talked to a lot of people there, and one thing that they acknowledged was something that you saw in that poll, that more people are understanding what Juneteenth was and the history of the country, the fact that slavery didn't end with the Emancipation Proclamation, but ended several years after. I want you to listen to some of those interactions I had, because that is one of the reasons why there was a push to make Juneteenth a federal holiday, to help educate more people. Listen here.
I'm very happy this is a federal holiday because, to be honest, I really didn't know anything about it, you know what I mean? And so I'm still learning, you know, about my particular culture.
We need to have those conversations. It's uncomfortable. It's true. It's uncomfortable. Slavery was uncomfortable. We need to talk about it.
One thing to note, not everyone has this as a paid day off. In about half of the country, states have not recognized it as an official holiday. So while it is a new holiday, it is not a paid holiday for millions of Americans, Savannah.
And Shaq, some corporations and organizations have been criticized for commercializing the day. Tell us a little more about that and how companies are trying to strike the right balance.
Yeah, you're seeing a lot of criticism on social media, especially in the weeks leading up to this holiday. One retailer, the largest retailer actually, they released a special Juneteenth edition ice cream. There was also a Juneteenth watermelon salad that one of the children's museum in Indianapolis released. All of that caused backlash. The companies apologized and said that they were working on being more sensitive to this. But that gives you an idea of the tension as people are trying to, and companies and corporations are trying to acknowledge the holiday, but some experts say are not doing it in the right way. I want you to listen to a little bit of how people are understanding and interpreting this balance and the nuance that this holiday brings.
I think if more companies had more people in decision-making positions who could help inform those conversations, they would think of more nuanced and I would just say better ways of recognizing the holiday.
You must profit as a company to do so in a way that is not offensive, that does not perpetuate stereotypes, and that really is thoughtful.
You know, if this sounds familiar, this is a similar frustration that you hear from many members of the military community around Memorial Day, or many members of the LGBTQ community during this Pride Month. It's the idea that, yes, it's a holiday, but you need to be sensitive as you approach it, especially if you're a corporation trying to or selling products that could potentially make money off of it.
Important point there. Shaq, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Shaq. And now let's take a look at your Morning News Now weather.
Michelle Grossman joins us. Hey, Michelle, good morning.
Hey there, guys. Great to see you on this Monday. And the big weather story remains the excessive heat across the country on this last day of spring. We have that stubborn pattern with a big area of high pressure. It's like a heat pump just bringing in that heat and humidity, and that will remain all week long. This is what it looks like, that big area of high pressure, the jet stream so far to the north. And we're going to break records once again this week. 71 records possible this week as we're looking at triple digits. You factor in the humidity, it's going to feel like 110 in a lot of spots. 9 million people impacted from the northern plains to the central plains, including the upper Midwest. But where you're not seeing an alert, we still have excessive heat through the south, the southeast. We're going to see Tallahassee near 104 by Thursday. So today, temperatures in the 90s and triple digits. Minneapolis today, it's going to feel like 106 once you factor in that humidity. It'll feel like 105 in Houston, feeling like 101 in New Orleans. That will continue into the first day of summer tomorrow. Temperatures near 100 degrees in many spots. Chicago, St. Louis, Little Rock, Austin, you're going to feel like 100 degrees. Atlanta is going to be hot too, in the mid to upper 90s. Then as we go throughout the late week, Tallahassee, this is going to be a big story as we head through the later part of this week with temperatures in Florida really, really warm. Tallahassee by Wednesday, 103, and by Thursday, 104. It's going to feel a lot warmer than that with humidity in place. It's going to prompt some storms, spark some storms, some severe weather later on this afternoon and evening. So we could see winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour, damaging hail, also the chance of a few tornadoes. That's mainly in the Dakotas into parts of the upper Midwest, but the state of Florida too could see a pretty stormy afternoon. So this is a setup for a stormy Monday. We have that heavy rain, mountain snow in the northern Rockies, and then we have that cold front moving through that really warm air that's going to bring the chance for those severe storms in the northern plains. And we're also looking at monsoonal moisture in the southwest. Back to you guys.
All right. My dad is fishing in northern Minnesota, and it's like mid-90s, which is not normal in northern Minnesota this time of year.
Not normal out there.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you. And coming up on Morning News Now, we're learning more about another American missing in Ukraine.
His family says, like the other two missing Americans, he traveled there to fight with the Ukrainians. Next, the growing concerns this morning, they've been captured by Russian forces. We're back with the latest on the war in Ukraine. A spokesman for the family of a third American who is missing after going there to fight has told NBC News they believe he is being held as a prisoner of war.
Comes just days after Russian state media showed video of two other Americans who volunteered to fight being held by Russian-backed separatists. NBC News correspondent Ellison Barber has the latest.
Marine veteran Grady Karpas traveled to Ukraine to fight.
The reasoning behind him going to Ukraine for humanitarian, just trying to help people in any which way possible.
Don Turner is speaking on behalf of Karpas's family.
We do believe that there's a good possibility he's a POW right now.
Karpas is one of 3 Americans reported missing in Ukraine. Russian state media published a video allegedly showing 2 others, Alex Druki and Andy Huen, in captivity. The U.S. State Department says they are aware of the videos but can't comment on them. From Kharkiv to Mariupol, The fight for control of eastern Ukraine has been a bruising one. But it's a fight Ukrainians refuse to abandon, no matter the cost. In Kyiv, mourners came to pay their respects to a well-known activist killed in combat. From the cathedral, Roman Ratushny's casket was taken to Maidan, Independence Square.
Thousands of people have come here to pay their respects to Roman. For many, this is a painful reminder of what this war is doing. It is taking young Ukrainians, some of the country's brightest hopes for the future.
Роман був символом поколінь. Він народився від вільних батьків у вільній країні.
Our thanks to Ellis and Barber for that report.
Let's get more on the situation in Ukraine with Jamil Jaffer. He is the founder and executive director of the National Security Institute and former associate White House counsel to President George W. Bush. Jamil, good to have you with us. So this video shown on Russian state television appears to confirm families' fears that 2 Americans fighting in Ukraine have been captured, while a third is missing. Russia considers foreign fighters mercenaries, therefore not protected under the Geneva Convention. How concerned are you about that? Is there anything the U.S. government can do to try and secure their release?
Well, look, Joe, obviously a very troubling situation with the Russians claiming that these fighters are not covered by the Geneva Conventions, the conventions that protect civilians in a time of war, as well as soldiers who are fighting, whether they're nationals of the country or not. If they're fighting openly, carrying their arms openly, wearing insignia, they are considered covered by the Geneva Convention. And so the Russians claim they're not considered is obviously concerning for these Americans that appear to have been captured in this conflict.
Let's talk about what's going on with Ukraine's status with potentially joining the European Union. On Friday, the European Commission recommended that Ukraine be granted candidate status for membership of the EU. Now leaders will make a final decision on that actually later this week. President Zelensky, though, said he expects Russia to intensify attacks on the country ahead of the decision. He even warned Europe that it could face retaliation in a broader sense. What do you make of all that? How important could EU membership be for Ukraine? Do you think there is more of a security concern there? And will this make a difference?
Well, look, Savannah, obviously an important move by the European Commission to recommend Ukraine for candidate status, and important to the community of nations bringing Ukraine in, including our support for them militarily and economically. But President Zelensky is exactly right that the Russians are going to likely increase pressure both on the Ukrainians to pressure them to not join the EU, but also pressure on the European Union to not accept Ukraine in, as they've threatened NATO and said, look, if you admit other nations, Sweden, Finland, into NATO, that's going to cause concerns for us near our border. They are also raising the same questions with Ukraine. And in some ways, the Russians have pointed out that what they were afraid of at all times was European involvement in Ukraine. This, in some ways, suggests the Russians were making a point. And now, but of course, the reason why this is happening is because the Russians illegally invaded Ukraine, not because Ukraine would otherwise join the EU or join NATO, but for the invasion.
And Jamil, yesterday, NATO's Secretary General told a German newspaper that the war could last years, something we've heard before, but that would require long-term military support. Do you think the West is prepared to stick it out, or do you worry that, Ukraine fatigue, as it's called, could maybe creep in?
Well, Joe, that's certainly a possibility. One of the big concerns here for both Ukrainians and Europeans alike is the length of this war, because what it'll ultimately lead to is not just military support needed to continue for Ukraine, economic support, but also continued deaths of Ukrainian civilians, right? We've seen the Russians intentionally target civilian populations, schools, hospitals, and the like. They will continue this process. The Russians' goal is to end this war on their terms, and the best way for them to do this is to put as much pressure on the Ukrainian people and therefore the Ukrainian government as possible. That involves this wanton killing of civilians, which is completely unacceptable under the laws of war, and yet continues going forward with this Russian invasion of Ukraine.
All right, Jamil Jaffer, always appreciate your expertise. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Let's get some other international headlines in. In France, President Emmanuel Macron's party has lost its majority in parliament.
NBC News foreign correspondent Janice Mackey-Freyer joins us now from Beijing with that and more world headlines. Janice, good morning.
Good morning. We begin in France with politics and what appears to be a big loss for French President Emmanuel Macron. Just after being re-elected less than 2 months ago, Macron has lost control of the National Assembly after strong showings by parties on the far left and the far right. The vote, which was carried out over several weeks, leaves French politics fragmented in a way the country's prime minister says is risky and unprecedented. Firefighters in Spain are struggling to get control of wildfires in several parts of the country, with an unusual heat wave tearing through Western Europe. About 650 firefighters, backed by water bombers, are trying to make gains with slightly cooler temperatures. They've been topping 104 degrees Fahrenheit the past few days, but low humidity and gusting winds are still very much a threat. And finally, one of the biggest pride parades on the planet was back, with hundreds of thousands of people waving colors in the streets of São Paulo, Brazil. The event was held virtually for 2 years because of the pandemic. This year, it was back in real life and a real celebration called Vote with Pride, which is a hint at Brazil's upcoming presidential elections. Organizers say it was, quote, an absolute pleasure to see the event come back to life. And that is your look at the world so far today.
Looks like fun, and maybe a preview of what we'll see at New York Pride with the parade returning this upcoming weekend.
True.
So.
It does look like fun.
Thank you, Janice.
Thanks, Janice.
With inflation at a record high and the Fed's increasing the interest rate again, is the U.S. heading toward a recession?
Economists say it's definitely a possibility, and we'll show you how some of the country's largest companies are preparing. Next, you're watching Morning News Now.
Welcome back. In this week's Meet the Press Compressed, Congressman Jamie Raskin talks about his role on the January 6th committee, plus former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers discusses the likelihood of an economic recession. Here's Meet the Press moderator Chuck Todd with the highlights.
Good morning. On this week's Meet the Press, the January 6th Select Committee's work is revealing new details about how far the Trump White House was willing to push election lies and how they knew what they were doing was illegal and unconstitutional. I spoke with Congressman Jamie Raskin. He's a Democrat of Maryland and a member of the House Select Committee about what to expect next from their public hearings. Plus, can we avoid a recession and worsening inflation? Former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers talks about the risks ahead and what the White House could do about it, at least on the margins. Here are some of the most important answers from Meet the Press Compressed. Do you think every time Donald Trump goes out there and essentially readmits to what he did, what should be the reaction of the Attorney General?
You know, the Attorney General really shouldn't be reacting to particular provocations by particular politicians or criminals. I mean, that's not really the role of the Attorney General. The role of the Attorney General is to determine, based on the facts and the law, whether there's probable cause to believe that somebody has violated the federal law in the United States, and then to follow the criteria of the Department of Justice.
And do you have any other evidence to indicate that there were real concerns about who the Secret Service, who Pence's detail was listening to?
I don't want to get into that. To me, it's obviously of interest, and I'm sure it's of interest to Vice President Pence in terms of his own whereabouts and his own movement. But in terms of the big picture, we know that there was an organized hit against our democracy.
Is a recession, a mild one, necessary in order to tame inflation? Can inflation at this point be tamed without triggering a recession?
I think all the precedents point towards a recession, Chuck. There's always a first time for everything, and I don't want ever to make forecasts with certainty. But if you look at a whole range of indicators, if you look at what's happened in markets, if you look at the relative levels of interest rates of different durations, if you look at surveys of consumer expectations, and if you look at the simple fact that what drives inflation is supply and demand, all of that tells me that while I wouldn't presume to be able to judge the timing, the dominant probability would be that by the end of next year, we would be seeing a recession in the American economy.
Any concern that the Fed's now going to overreact? raise interest rates too high while also pulling money out of the market with a quantitative tightening. Is there a bigger risk of them doing too much, or do you still worry that they're going to do too little?
I think they've got to find a balance. But, you know, Chuck, when the doctor prescribes antibiotics, if you stop taking them the moment you feel better, it can often be a mistake to not carry through. And if the worst thing we could do would be to start to stop inflation and not do enough to slay the dragon.
Our thanks to Chuck Todd for that recap.
Now let's stay on your money for a moment and ask this critical question. Will the average American spend less, meaning buy fewer things, when faced with skyrocketing price tags and talks of a recession? NBC News correspondent Tom Costello has more.
Even as President Biden insists a recession is not inevitable, a growing number of business leaders disagrees. 60% of global CEOs, according to a new survey, expect a recession in the next 12 to 18 months. The risk increasing if gas climbs over $5 a gallon nationally, inflation remains high, and the Fed keeps raising interest rates. Wall Street closed mixed. The Dow down 17% this year.
We've pumped a lot of money into the system to try and bail ourselves out of a complete economic global shutdown due to the pandemic, right? That is going to take a while to unwind.
A recession is defined as 2 quarters in which the economy contracts rather than grows. Already, the first quarter of 2022 contracted, blamed on the Omicron variant. We'll know soon if the second quarter also contracted. The list of companies slowing hiring or announcing layoffs is growing, including Facebook, Meta, Coinbase, Redfin, and Bolt. The question now, will Americans cut back on spending?
Come on in, guys. Welcome to Nationals.
At the Nats-Phillies game, many fans said baseball is simply a summer ritual.
I think since COVID, everybody just wants to get out. So
You'll pay the price.
We'll pay the price.
It's not cheap. Tickets averaging $35 nationally, beer up to $12, hot dogs up to $7. A family of 4 paying $253 on average.
We'll spend the money on the food and the parking. It's worth it.
But for many Americans,
we have a certain amount of money for gas that we spend every single week, and that's all we spend. And honestly, if we run out and we don't have any more gas money, we don't go places.
The recession is here now.
Oof, $7 for a hot dog.
Okay.
That's what I took away. Thanks, Tom Costello, for that report.
All right, coming up on Morning News Now, we're going to take a look at what the threat of a recession could mean for the hot housing market.
Yeah, are we facing another housing bubble about to burst? We'll take a look at how likely it is this could happen again. That's after the break. Back now with a closer look at the red-hot housing market. It was just over a decade ago when it totally crumbled. Prices took a nosedive and millions of properties turned to foreclosure.
Now with mortgage rates spiking to levels not seen since 2008, the question stands, will history soon repeat itself? CNBC's Diana Olick takes a closer look.
During the Great Recession, when home prices positively crashed, millions of homes went into foreclosure. That was because the mortgages holding up the housing market were a mess. Lenders were basically giving anyone a loan. Not so since then. For the 53.5 million first lien home mortgages in America today, the average borrower credit score is a record high 751. It was below 700 back in 2010. And thanks to the recent run-up in home prices, those borrowers have record tappable home equity. That's how much you can take out of your home and still leave 20% equity in it. $11 trillion in total, up 34% from a year ago. That's a significant cushion in case home prices soften or even fall.
If the economy were to slow significantly, then we could potentially see home price dips. But that's not my base case. My expectation is that we'll see home price grow.
During the Great Recession, 1 in 4 homeowners was underwater on their mortgage, meaning they owed more than the home was worth.
So when it comes to the financial position of homeowners in the aggregate, housing is on really solid footing right now.
So what about the riskier loans? Well, there are just 2.5 million adjustable rate mortgages outstanding today. Compare that to 13 million in 2007, just before the housing crash. A little more than half of those today are about to reset to higher rates, so there is a risk. But back in 2007, about 10 million of those were resetting higher. Mortgage delinquencies are now at a record low, just 3% of loans, which is actually less than before the pandemic.
The real risk to housing right now is affordability and recession. Prices are still so high that some new buyers just can't get in. And sky-high rents make saving for a down payment very difficult. As for current homeowners, if a recession hits and people start to lose their jobs, then they may struggle to make their payments, especially if they stretch to buy that home in the first place. Back to you.
Diana, thank you.
Yeah, coming up, the U.S. marked 2 celebrations on Sunday.
Father's Day and Juneteenth. We're going to take you behind the museum exhibit open in time to celebrate both holidays. That's next. Now to some good news on this Monday morning from under the sea. Researchers in Indonesia say they found a way to check on the health of a coral reef just by listening to it. But how does one listen to a coral reef exactly? Well, with specially designed microphones and a top-notch computer program, of course. The sounds of the observed reefs are recorded, then sent through an app of sorts that has been trained to tell the difference between a healthy-sounding reef and one that might need a little more love. Now, normally a healthy reef sounds sort of like a crackling campfire. The louder the sounds, the more wildlife. Marine biologists say this latest tech will help them monitor the progress of local coral restoration projects, whatever it takes to help keep those corals healthy.
Absolutely. And how neat. I mean, how amazing is that? They could tell just by the sound of it. Very, very cool.
Sound of a crackling wildfire.
Yeah. Great to know such smart people are working on things like that for us. Joe, thank you very much. Now, this year, as Father's Day and Juneteenth overlap, a new photography exhibit is celebrating Black fatherhood. 75 photographs that display the love and joy of Black men for their children are being showcased at Washington, D.C.'s Corcoran School of Arts and Design. NBC News Now correspondent Zincle Esima headed down to D.C. to see this important exhibition.
How important is it for you to see other Black people, like on TV, in the shows you watch?
Yeah, because there's not much Black people on TV and shows at my school.
For Black men, portrayal in the media is not only narrow, but oftentimes negative.
What do you think we as a country, as a culture, get wrong about fatherhood for Black men?
That when we make a mistake, it's intentional.
There is an issue with how Black people in general are portrayed in the media, especially with all of the police killings of Black men and women.
This exhibit hopes to change that.
I really wanted to celebrate Black boyhood, Black manhood, and all as an example for my son, Isaiah.
Dr. Imani Cheers is a single mom and curator of Framing Fatherhood on display at DC's Corcoran School of Arts and Design this summer. It's inspired by her own father, who showcased his photography at the Corcoran in 1992. 30 years later, she's brought together 14 photographers, all Black men, putting a new lens on Black fatherhood.
Man, Black fatherhood is so necessary. It's responsibility, discipline, protection.
You are a new dad. How is fatherhood for you?
Well, fatherhood has been absolutely wonderful. To me, a great Black father is someone that's walking down the street in a suit, but it's also that guy that you see a picture of that's covered in tattoos and a do-rag.
Cunningham is talking about how Black men are represented and perceived. Today, while there are more Black people on the big screen, a recent study by McKinsey showing that about 11% of on-screen leads or co-leads are Black, the same can't be said about those writing the stories. Cheers wants this exhibit to encourage more positive agency and imagery of Blackness, something she knows a lot about.
You were actually my first Black teacher ever.
I realized that many of my students, especially my Black and brown students, had never had an educator of color.
She hopes Black representation will be less of an anomaly, framing fatherhood a first step in capturing necessary portraits of Black humanity for generations to come.
So, Isaiah, where are you in all of these photos?
Right here.
How do you feel about being a Black boy?
I feel proud and happy.
Our thanks to Zincle Esima for that story. And for those who do want to go see it in person, it's in Washington, D.C. at the Corcoran, and it'll be open to the public until July 31st.
Very cool. Visibility so vital. That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.